The same weekend I walked across the stage to collect my diploma. Summa cum laude. My parents were hosting a party for 40 guests. Champagne. String lights. A custom cake with gold lettering. None of it was for me. It was my sister Madison's engagement party. 4 years of overnight shifts at a gas station. 4 years of studying between customers and coffee refills. 4 years of keeping my head down and doing the work nobody saw. When the dean shook my hand at graduation and said my name, the arena erupted for a moment. But the 2 seats in the front row I'd saved for my parents stayed empty. Later that night, sitting alone in my car in the parking lot, my phone buzzed. One message from my mother. Sorry. Honey. Madison needed us more tonight. You understand? Right. I read it twice. Then I closed the screen and drove away. 7 years later, my mother saw a photo of my penthouse on Instagram. Suddenly I wasn't the son who could take care of himself anymore. Suddenly I was darling again. What she didn't know was that I hadn't been waiting for revenge. I'd been waiting for the truth to have enough room to stand. So, when I walked into that family dinner, I brought a manila envelope. What was inside changed everything. Just not the way my mother expected. Before I go any further, let me say something real quick. If this story hits close to home for you, if you've ever been the one in the family who worked quietly while someone else took the spotlight, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. Not because you have to, but because stories like this travel further when people connect with them. And I'm always curious where people are listening from. Drop your city and local time down in the comments. I read them more often than you'd think. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 29 years old. And I live in Austin, Texas. But the story you're about to hear didn't start here. It started 7 years ago. The day an empty chair in the front row told me everything I needed to know about my family. I grew up in a town called Maple Ridge, Alabama. The kind of place where people know your last name before they know your story. One main road. 2 gas stations. A high school football field that mattered more than the town council. And rows of houses that had barely changed in 30 years. The Walker family lived in a pale blue ranch house on Cedar Hollow Drive. 3 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A cracked concrete driveway. And a refrigerator in the kitchen that told you everything you needed to know about how that house worked. The refrigerator was covered in photos. All of them were of Madison. Madison is my older sister. 3 years ahead of me in everything. She was the kind of person small towns orbit around. Prom queen junior and senior year. Captain of the dance team. The girl whose smile ended up in every school yearbook spread and half the church newsletters. Every Friday night, our mother Patricia would post a new photo album on Facebook. My beautiful girl at homecoming. My shining star. So proud of my daughter. You'd think she only had one child. I wasn't invisible. I was just convenient. While Madison was posing for photos at football games, I was working the 11 to Setia shift at the gas station on Highway 18. It meant I didn't have to ask for money for textbooks. It meant if I needed something, I paid for it myself. I kept a 4.0 gigapascals through all 4 years of high school. When the acceptance letter from the University of Texas arrived, full academic scholarship, I ran into the kitchen holding it like a flag. Mom. Look. Patricia glanced up from her phone. That's nice. Honey. Can you tell Madison dinner's ready? That was the whole conversation. That night I taped my honor roll certificate to the refrigerator. Right next to Madison's senior portrait. By morning it was gone. I found it in the recycling bin under an empty cereal box. When I asked my mother about it, she didn't even turn around from the sink. It cluttered the fridge, she said. There wasn't room. There were 9 photos of Madison on that refrigerator. I counted. My father Thomas Walker worked as a mechanic at Harper's Auto Repair. Quiet man. Grease under his nails and the kind of patience that comes from fixing things all day. I believe he loved both of his kids. But my father loved peace more than anything else. And in our house, peace meant agreeing with Patricia. I didn't understand it back then. But that refrigerator was more than decoration. It was a map. A small preview of exactly how the next 20 years of my life were going to play out. May. 7 years ago. University of Texas commencement. The arena held thousands of people. Families packed into rows of folding seats. Voices bouncing off the rafters. Air horns going off somewhere in the upper levels. Every few seconds another name was called. Another cheer rising like a wave. It was loud enough to blur together. Except for one small pocket of silence. Row 7. Seats 4 and 5. Empty. I'd mailed the invitations 2 months earlier. Cream cardstock. Gold lettering. I'd even written a note inside the envelope. Row 7. Seats 4 and 5. Saved for you. A week before the ceremony my mother had squeezed my hand during a FaceTime call. Of course we'll be there. Patricia said. We wouldn't miss it. But when my name was called and I stepped onto the stage in a blue gown with a gold cord draped across my shoulders, Those 2 seats were still empty. Summa cum laude. The dean shook my hand and leaned in slightly. Outstanding work. Mr. Walker. I nodded, thanked him, and looked out across the sea of faces. Thousands of people, none of them were mine. After the ceremony, the lawn outside the arena filled instantly. Families everywhere. Parents hugging their kids. Fathers lifting diplomas into the air for photos. Mothers crying and laughing at the same time. I stood near the edge of the crowd holding my diploma in both hands. Like it was something fragile. Or temporary. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One text. From Patricia. Sorry. Honey. Madison needed us more today. The engagement party was tonight and you know how she gets. You understand. Right. I read it once. Then again. There was no anger in the message. No apology that meant anything. Just a quiet assumption that of course I would accept it. That this was normal. I walked to the parking lot. Opened the trunk of my car. And set the diploma inside next to a bag of laundry I'd brought home from the dorm. I didn't cry. Crying would have meant I was surprised. And I wasn't. I sat in the driver's seat for almost 20 minutes while the lot slowly emptied. Engines starting. Doors slamming. Families heading off to dinners and celebrations. I didn't know where I was supposed to go. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn for another 7 years, was that my father had actually been in that arena that day. He'd been sitting in the back row. 10 minutes before my name was called. But that part of the story comes later. I left Maple Ridge that summer and moved to Austin, Texas with everything I owned, packed into the back of my car. No farewell dinner. No long conversation with my parents. Just a 4-hour drive west, and the quiet understanding that if I wanted a life, I was going to have to build it myself. My first apartment was a studio barely bigger than a walk-in closet. One window facing a brick wall. A mattress on the floor. And a folding table that doubled as both a desk and a kitchen counter. It wasn't much. But it was mine. I landed an entry-level cybersecurity analyst job at a logistics technology company downtown. The kind of job where you spend most of your day staring at code and traffic logs while the rest of the world moves past your window. The pay wasn't impressive. So, I lived carefully. Rice and frozen vegetables 5 nights a week. Black coffee instead of takeout. Old sneakers until the soles started separating. I kept my head down and worked. 6 months in. I was the first one in the office, and the last one to leave. Not because anyone asked me to. But because I understood something early on. No one was coming to build my future for me. Back in Maple Ridge. My family's life looked very different. Madison's engagement had turned into a wedding that filled half the church. Photos everywhere. Facebook posts from my mother about her beautiful daughter starting a new chapter. I saw the pictures sometimes. Madison smiling in a white dress. My mother crying happy tears. My father standing quietly in the background. I didn't comment. I didn't call. Not because I was angry. Just because distance has a way of showing you what conversations actually matter. For the first year after graduation, my life moved in a straight line. Sleep. Repeat. Then one Tuesday night, when I was 23, my phone rang, and everything started shifting again. I was 23 when the first call came. It was a Tuesday night. A little after 9. I'd just gotten back to my apartment after a 12-hour shift and was halfway through a bowl of microwaved rice when my phone lit up. Patricia. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Hey. Mom. Her voice was softer than usual. The kind of softness that meant something was coming. Ethan. Honey, I didn't want to bother you. But things have been hard here. I leaned back against the kitchen counter and waited. Your father's back has been acting up again. She continued. He can barely get through a full day at the shop. And the mortgage? Well, the payment went up. There was a pause long enough for the next sentence to land harder. We might lose the house. For a second I didn't say anything. That blue ranch house on Cedar Hollow Drive wasn't fancy. But it held every memory I had from childhood. The porch where my dad taught me how to balance on a bike. The garage where he showed me how to change a tire when I was 12. Losing it felt wrong. How much do you need? I asked. Just $1,450 a month. She said quickly. Only until we get back on our feet. I did the math in my head. At the time, that was almost half of what I brought home after taxes. I ran the numbers again anyway. Then I said yes. The first transfer went through on October 15th. After that, it became routine. Every month. Like clockwork. $1,450 left my account on the 15th and landed in Patricia's. It felt less like helping and more like paying rent on a house I didn't live in anymore. Still, I never complained. 6 months became a year. A year turned into 3. Then 6. In total, 72 transfers. More than $104,000 sent to my parents over 6 years. And I never once asked to see the mortgage statement. That was my first mistake. The second call came about 3 years into those payments. Same timing. Tuesday night. Ethan. Patricia said. Your father's truck finally died. The engine's shot. What happened? It just gave out. And he needs a vehicle to get to the shop. I found a good deal though. A used Ford Ranger. $31,000. I frowned. That's not exactly cheap. I know. She said quickly. But my credit score won't qualify for the loan anymore. There it was. I need you to co-sign. I stared at the wall across from me. Mom. Co-signing is a big commitment. It's just paperwork. She said. I'll make every payment myself. Don't you trust your own mother? That sentence sat in the room for a moment. I thought about my dad standing at a bus stop in the Alabama heat, waiting for a ride to the garage. So the following week, I signed the papers. For the first 2 years, everything was smooth. Every payment on time. No issues. Eventually, I almost forgot the loan even existed. Until 6 months ago. That's when I got the first notice from the bank. Late payment. 14 days overdue. I texted Patricia immediately. Mom. The truck payment was late. Everything okay? Her reply came 10 minutes later. Just a hiccup. Honey. Don't worry about it. 2 months later. Another notice. 19 days overdue. This time I called. Mom. This is affecting my credit. Ethan. She said calmly. I told you I'd handle it. You're making a big deal out of nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Because that loan had my name on it. And the more I looked at the numbers, the more something about the whole situation started to feel off. I just didn't know exactly why yet. Not until someone else looked at the math. I met Laura Kim 2 years ago at a housewarming party for one of my coworkers. She was standing in the kitchen, reading the label on a bottle of wine like she was auditing it. Someone introduced us. Laura's a CPA. They said. That explained the label. We talked for maybe 10 minutes that night. Numbers. Work. Normal things. She had the calm kind of personality that doesn't waste energy on noise. A few months later we started dating. Laura was the first person who ever looked at my monthly budget and didn't say I was responsible. She said something else. You're being too generous with people who don't seem to be giving much back. At the time, I laughed it off. 6 years of sending money to my parents had become normal by then. $1,450 a month was just another line item in my bank account. But the late truck payments changed the math. One night we were sitting at my kitchen counter eating takeout when Laura pulled my laptop closer. Let me see something. She said. I opened my bank statements. She scrolled quietly. Month after month of transfers. October 15. November 11-10. December 15. Every line the same. O mi patru sute chingzeches transfer. Patricia Walker. 72 times. Laura leaned back in her chair. Why are you still sending them this much every month? Mortgage help. I said. Dad's health hasn't been great. She nodded slowly. Then she picked up her phone. What's their address? I told her. She opened Zillow and typed it in. A photo of the house on Cedar Hollow Drive appeared on the screen. Same blue siding. Same front porch. Estimated value. $1 million. Built. Last sold. Laura set the phone down between us. Let's run a quick estimate. She said. I knew that tone. CPA mode. If they bought this place in the late 90s for around $120,000 on a 30-year mortgage, the payment would have been under $800 a month. She tapped the screen. And that's before 25 years of payments. I stared at the photo of the house. The mailbox my dad repainted every spring. The porch swing my mother insisted on hanging. Laura spoke carefully. I'm not saying anything is wrong. A pause. But there's a very real chance that house is already paid off. The words hung in the air. Not anger yet. Just a shift. Like spotting a crack in a wall you've leaned against your whole life. That night I lay in bed doing math. 25 years of mortgage payments. A house under $200,000. My monthly transfers. The numbers didn't line up. The next morning, I called Patricia. Mom. Quick question. I said. Sure. Honey. What's the current mortgage balance on the house? Silence. 3 seconds. Then her voice changed, cooler now. Why are you asking that? I just want to know where the money's going. Another pause. You sound like someone's been putting ideas in your head. She said. Is this Laura? I'm just asking a question. Well, I don't appreciate the tone. Ethan. Patricia replied. Your sister's barely holding things together right now. Your father's health is a mess. And I might not even be able to make the truck payment this month. She never answered the question. Instead, she reminded me of the loan. A leash. I hung up the phone a few minutes later with one realization sitting quietly in the back of my mind. My mother had just dodged the only number that mattered. And once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. 3 months before the dinner. Laura walked into the kitchen one Saturday morning, holding her laptop the way someone carries a tray. "Sit down," she said. Her voice wasn't dramatic, just precise. I pulled out a chair. On the screen were county property records for Maple Ridge, Alabama, public filings, deeds, tax assessments, lien history. Everything the county clerk kept on file. Laura rotated the laptop toward me. The address at the top of the page read, Walker Residence, Cedar Hollow Drive. Below it was a line labeled mortgage status. I read it once. Then again. Satisfied. Payoff date, March 2019. No liens. No second mortgage. No home equity line. Just one final entry showing the loan had been closed. I leaned back in my chair slowly. March 2019. The first transfer I'd sent my mother didn't start until October 2019. 7 months later. Which meant something very simple. For 6 years. Every dollar I'd sent had been paying a mortgage that didn't exist. Laura didn't say anything. She just slid a printed copy of the deed record across the table. I looked at it the way people look at medical results they already understand. $1,600,000. That's how much I'd transferred over 6 years. I stood up, grabbed my running shoes, and left the apartment without another word. 40 minutes later I was running through downtown Austin. Past the coffee shop where Laura first told me I was too generous. Past the park bench where I'd once called my father on Thanksgiving and gotten nothing but voicemail. I ran until the anger burned itself down to something colder. Clarity. When I got back, Laura was still sitting at the kitchen table. Same chair. Same screen. "Whatever you decide," she said. "I'm with you." I poured a glass of water and drank it standing up. "I know the money didn't go to the house," I said. "But I still don't know where it did go." The answer came from somewhere I wasn't expecting. And it arrived with a phone call I almost ignored. 2 weeks before the dinner. I was standing on the balcony of my condo watching the sun drop behind the Austin skyline. 14 floors up. The city looked calm. Glass towers catching the last orange light. Traffic moving slowly below like a river of red tail lights. I took a photo without thinking. Just the view. The railing. And a coffee mug sitting beside my hand. I posted it on Instagram with one word. For a few hours it was quiet. Friends commented. Coworkers dropped a few emojis. Normal things. Then my phone started vibrating again. And again. Patricia. Madison. Aunt Linda. 2 cousins I hadn't heard from in years. "Is that your place? When did you buy this? That view is incredible." Then, a direct message from my mother. I read it twice. "Darling. We need to talk. Come home this weekend. Everyone's been worried about you." My mother hadn't called me darling since I was 12 years old. Not once in 17 years. One photo of a condo. And suddenly I existed again. I showed the message to Laura. She read it quietly and set the phone back down. "You think it's just dinner?" she asked. "No," I said. "I think it's a stage." And if it was a stage, I was already bringing the script. Laura and I left Austin before sunrise that Saturday. The highway was quiet for the first hour. Just long stretches of asphalt, and the pale blue line of morning appearing over the horizon. Laura rested one hand on my knee while I drove. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The manila envelope sat in my shoulder bag on the back seat. When we finally turned onto Cedar Hollow Drive, the first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the cars. Pickups. Sedans. At least a dozen of them lined along both sides of the street. Some spilling onto the neighbor's lawn. Laura leaned forward slightly in her seat. "That's not a family dinner." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." I parked at the end of the block. Through the front window of the house, I could see people moving around inside. Familiar faces, neighbors from church. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Uncle Raymond's truck in the driveway. Claire's blue sedan parked near the mailbox. 20 people. Maybe more. A stage. Laura and I walked up the driveway together. The front door swung open before we even reached the porch. Patricia stepped out quickly. Arms wide. Already smiling. "My son's home," she called loudly. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled like perfume and baked bread. Behind her, people clapped. Actually clapped. Like I had just returned from war instead of driving 5 hours down the interstate. Inside, the living room had been rearranged to fit a long dining table that stretched halfway across the room. Casserole dishes lined the surface. Mason jars filled with sweet tea. Paper plates stacked at the end. And above the fireplace hung a banner made from green construction paper letters. "Family first." My father stood in the corner of the kitchen drying a glass with a towel. He glanced up when I walked in. Then lowered his eyes again. Madison sat at the far end of the table beside Derek. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Dinner was loud. Almost normal. Aunt Linda passed the cornbread. Uncle Raymond told a fishing story. Claire caught my eye from across the table and gave a small nod like she knew something important was about to happen. I barely touched my food. Then, somewhere between dessert and coffee, Patricia stood up. She tapped her fork gently against a glass. The room fell quiet. "I just want to say something," she began, smiling toward me. "Most of you know Ethan moved to Austin a few years ago and built himself a wonderful career." A few people nodded. "And recently did everyone see that Instagram photo?" she continued. "Our boy bought himself a beautiful condo." Someone whistled softly. Patricia laughed. "I always knew he'd make it. That drive, he gets that from me." Laura's hand squeezed my knee under the table. Then Patricia's voice shifted slightly. "And because family means everything to the Walkers," she said warmly. "Ethan has generously offered to help Madison and Derek get back on their feet after this difficult year." I looked up slowly. I had never said that. Not once. But the room didn't know that. People started nodding. A few even clapped. Madison dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Derek sat quietly like a man receiving a gift he expected. Patricia turned toward me with the same warm smile she'd used my entire life. "Well, Ethan," she said softly, "why don't you say a few words?" 20 faces turned toward me. The room went completely silent. And that's when I reached for the manila envelope. 20 faces turned toward me. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the refrigerator behind me. The same refrigerator that once held a wall of Madison's photos and none of mine. Patricia stood beside her chair, smiling like a host presenting the guest of honor. Madison clutched a napkin in both hands. Derek leaned back in his seat, calm, almost grateful. They were waiting for the same sentence. Of course. Anything for family. Instead, I reached into my bag. The manila envelope slid out easily. I opened it slowly. No rush. Inside were 2 sheets of paper and a folded card. I placed the card back in the envelope and held the 2 pages loosely at my side. "Before I say anything," I said calmly, "there's something everyone here should know." My voice sounded steady, which surprised even me. For the past 6 years, I've been sending my parents $1,450 every month. A few people nodded. They'd probably heard that story already. Patricia was still smiling. But the smile had tightened slightly. She told me the money was for the mortgage on this house. I continued. Then I looked directly at her. Patricia's eyes flickered for half a second. "According to the public county property records for Maple Ridge, this house has been fully paid off since March 2019. I handed the first sheet of paper to Uncle Raymond, who was sitting closest to me. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the document. "The deed record. Mortgage status. Satisfied." He nodded once. "That's right," he said quietly. "Looks like it." The room shifted. Not loudly. Just the subtle movement of people realizing they were hearing something new. "That means," I continued, "the house had already been paid off 7 months before my mother called asking for help." I held up the second sheet. "Over the last 6 years. Those transfers total $104,400. Someone at the far end of the table inhaled sharply. "I don't know exactly where every dollar went," I said. "But I know now that none of it went to a mortgage." The silence in the room thickened. Aunt Linda looked at Patricia. Uncle Raymond placed the document slowly on the table. Patricia's smile disappeared. "Ethan," she said quietly, "this isn't the time for." "You chose the time," I replied. My tone never rose. "You invited everyone here." I gestured lightly toward the table. "You told them I offered to financially support Madison and Derek." That was never a conversation we had. Madison's eyes moved quickly between Patricia and the papers on the table. Derek shifted in his seat. I placed both documents in the middle of the table. "If anyone wants to see the numbers," I said. "They're right there. No accusations. Just math." Uncle Raymond stood first, pushing his chair back with a scrape against the floor. "Patricia," he said slowly, "is this true?" His voice was heavy, like a man already halfway to the answer. "You told us Ethan stopped calling." Aunt Linda added quietly. "You told us he moved away and cut the family off." Patricia's hands trembled slightly. "This is a family matter," she said. "He's airing dirty laundry in front of." "You invited us," Claire said from the other side of the table. Her voice cut clean across the room. "You invited us here to watch him say yes." She looked down at the documents. "You don't get to call it dirty laundry when he says no." 2 neighbors from church exchanged glances and quietly stood to leave. Patricia looked toward Madison, looking for help. Madison didn't meet her eyes. She was staring at the numbers on the page, actually doing the math. Derek stood up without a word. His chair slid backward. He walked straight to the front door and stepped outside. The screen door slammed behind him. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even spoke. Patricia sank slowly back into her chair. For the first time in my entire life. She had no script. No tears. No pivot. No story. Just silence. Uncle Raymond lifted the property record again so the room could see it. You told this whole family Ethan abandoned you. He said quietly. You told Ruth he wouldn't even answer the phone when Thomas was in the hospital. He shook his head. Looks to me like the opposite might be true. Patricia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I sat down again. Calm. My hands were cold. But I wasn't shaking. Not from fear. From relief. For the first time in 7 years. The truth wasn't sitting in my chest alone. It was sitting in the middle of the table. And everyone could see it. But the night wasn't finished yet. Because Uncle Raymond cleared his throat. There's something else. He said. And suddenly the room held its breath again. Uncle Raymond stood in the middle of the room with both hands in his pockets. He looked at my father the way an older brother looks at someone he's protected for a long time and is finally about to stop. 7 years ago. He said slowly. Thomas drove to Ethan's graduation. The words landed like a stone in water. I stopped breathing. What I asked quietly. I know because he borrowed my truck that morning. Raymond continued. His car wouldn't start. He showed up at my place around 6 a.m. asking for the keys. Raymond looked straight at my father. He said. I'm not missing this. Every face in the room turned toward Thomas. My father stood in the kitchen doorway. One hand resting on the counter. Eyes closed. He drove 4 hours. Raymond went on. Got there early. Sat in the back row. My chest tightened. I know because he called me from the parking lot afterward. Raymond said. Told me he watched you walk across that stage. For a second. The room disappeared. My father had been there. He had seen it. Then Raymond's voice hardened. 10 minutes before Ethan's name was called. Patricia phoned him. Patricia's head snapped up. Raymond. She told him Madison had collapsed at the engagement party. Raymond said flatly. Said he needed to come back immediately. The room went still. Kendra never fainted. He added. The lie hung in the air. My father opened his eyes slowly. Tears were running down both sides of his face. I should have stayed. He whispered. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I should have stayed. I'm sorry. Patricia stood abruptly. That's not how it. It is how it happened, my father said. 2 words followed that changed the entire room. Stop. Patricia. It was the first time he had spoken all night. And it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at her. The man who had spent 30 years choosing silence had finally chosen a side. I gripped the edge of the table. Feeling something split open inside my chest, part grief. Part relief. My father had been there. He had watched me graduate. And my mother had pulled him away with a lie. But the truth wasn't finished unfolding yet. Because from the far end of the table, Claire slowly stood up. And what she said next would break the last piece of the illusion my mother had built. Claire didn't raise her voice when she stood up. She didn't have to. The room was already silent. Since we're being honest tonight, she said calmly. There's something else Aunt Patricia didn't mention. People shifted in their chairs. Claire worked at the county clerk's office in Maple Ridge. Paperwork. Records. Filings. The kind of job where nothing stays hidden for long. 3 months ago. She continued. Derek Shaw was arrested for driving under the influence. Every head turned toward the front door. Derek had come back inside at some point and was standing near the wall. His face turned red instantly. I processed the paperwork myself. Claire said. Aunt Patricia posted his bail that same night. Madison's head snapped toward her mother. You knew, she asked quietly. Patricia raised both hands defensively. I was protecting this family. No. Uncle Raymond said. His voice like gravel. You were protecting an image. There was a difference. Madison stood up slowly. You bailed him out and never told me. Derek stared at the floor. Madison's voice rose. You let me keep defending him to everyone while you knew. No one answered. Patricia sat back down in her chair like the air had suddenly left her lungs. Above her head, the banner still hung across the fireplace. Family first. It looked different now. Like a joke someone forgot to erase. People began leaving quietly. 2 of the church neighbors slipped their coats on and walked out without a word. Aunt Linda hugged me near the doorway. We didn't know. Sweetheart? She said softly. If I had any idea. Uncle Dennis stood behind her, shaking his head. Your mother told us you stopped calling. Said you didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. Claire gave me a quick hug as she passed. You did the right thing. Madison hadn't moved from her seat. She sat staring at the papers on the table, the numbers. The transfers. The timeline. Real tears now. Processing tears. Derek walked out again. This time for good. His truck engine roared to life outside and disappeared down the street. Inside the house, Patricia sat alone at the head of the table. The cobbler had gone cold. The sweet tea had turned watery. And the banner above her still read Family First. Only now no one in the room believed it. The next morning, Laura and I were loading the car outside Uncle Raymond's house, where we had stayed the night. The sun had just started climbing over the trees. The air smelled like pine and damp red clay. Small town mornings always felt quieter than they should. I closed the trunk and turned around when I saw someone walking down the driveway. My father. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and was still wearing the same flannel shirt from the night before. He sat down on the porch step. I walked over and sat beside him. For a full minute neither of us spoke. Thomas held the cup with both hands like it was the only warm thing left in the world. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, eventually. I didn't answer. I was there that day. He continued. "At your graduation," his voice was low, "I saw you walk across that stage." He swallowed. "You looked proud." I stared out at the gravel driveway. "And I left," he said. He shook his head slowly. "Your mother told me Madison had fainted. Said I needed to get back right away." He paused. "But the truth is, I left because I was a coward." There wasn't anything to argue with in that sentence. He looked down at the coffee cup. "I knew about the money," he admitted. "Not all of it. But enough to know something wasn't right." "You never asked," I said. "No," he replied quietly. "I didn't." Silence settled between us again. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. Finally I stood up. "If you want to talk," I said, "call me on Tuesdays." He looked up. "Just you," I added. "Not through Mom." His eyes were red but steady. "Tuesdays," he said. He reached over and squeezed my hand once. Quick and rough. The way men do when they don't trust themselves to show more. Laura stepped outside the house just then but stayed by the door, giving us space. As I walked back toward the car, I saw someone else standing at the end of the driveway. Madison. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. She looked smaller than I remembered. "I didn't know the house was paid off," she said quietly. I leaned against the car door. "She told me you offered the money," Madison continued. "Said it was your idea. And you never asked me directly." She flinched slightly. "No," she admitted. For a moment we both just stood there. "What do I do now?" she asked. "That's not my decision," I said. "But if I were you," I nodded toward the house behind her. "I'd start by looking at your own bank statements." She pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. I opened the car door. "I don't hate you," I told her. "But I'm done carrying both of us." She didn't answer. She just stood there in the driveway as Laura and I pulled away. 2 weeks after that dinner, the dust started settling. The first thing that disappeared was the Facebook posts. Patricia deleted the photo of the banner. Then the album from that night. A few days later her entire profile went dark. 10 years of carefully curated family photos vanished like someone had turned off a light. For the first time in my life, the image she worked so hard to protect had cracks in it. My father called the following Tuesday. 8 minutes. Mostly silence. He talked about rebuilding a carburetor at the shop. I told him about a network security project I was working on in Austin. We didn't mention the dinner. We didn't mention Patricia. The call itself was the point. The next Tuesday it was 12 minutes. Small things. Progress rarely looks dramatic when it's real. Madison texted 3 weeks later. "I filed for divorce." No explanation. She didn't need one. Later I heard through Claire that Derek had been hiding tens of thousands of dollars in online gambling losses. The DUI arrest had just been the crack that exposed everything else. Uncle Raymond organized what he called a real family dinner about a month later. No banners. No speeches. Just Raymond, my father, Claire, Aunt Linda, and me on a video call eating takeout and talking about normal things. It felt strange. And honest. Patricia texted me 3 times during those weeks. I didn't block her. But I didn't answer either. Her last message said, "I did what I thought was best for this family." I read it sitting on my balcony 14 floors above the city. Laura handed me a cup of coffee and sat down beside me. "You going to reply?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "When she's ready to acknowledge something instead of explaining it." Laura nodded. The skyline stretched out in front of us. Glass towers catching the afternoon light. My bank account was different now. $1,450 a month. Stayed where it belonged. But the real thing I got back wasn't money. It was quieter than that. It was my name. For 7 years I'd been the son who disappeared. The selfish one. The one who stopped caring. That story worked for a long time. Until the truth walked into a room full of people and sat down at the table. And once that happened, something important became clear. Loving your family doesn't mean letting them consume you. Sometimes love just means knowing where the line is. And having the strength to stand on your side of it. A few weeks ago I finally finished unpacking the last box in my condo. It had been sitting in the corner of my office since I moved in. Old notebooks. A tangle of chargers. Things that didn't matter enough to deal with earlier. At the bottom of the box I found something I hadn't seen in years. My graduation invitation. Cream cardstock. Gold lettering. Inside. In my own handwriting from 7 years ago. Row 7. Seats 4 and 5. Saved for you. I stood there for a minute holding it while the evening light from the balcony spilled across the floor. The diploma from that day now hangs framed on the wall behind my desk. Not as a trophy. Just a reminder. Of the distance between where I started and where I ended up. My father still calls every Tuesday. Last week he told one of the guys at the shop about my place in Austin. He did all that on his own. My dad said. I didn't correct him. 14 floors up. The city hums outside my windows. And when I turn the key in my door at night, I know something simple and important. Everything inside that space. Every wall. Every light. Every quiet moment. Belongs to me. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever had to draw a boundary with someone you love, I'd really like to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments. I read more of them than you might expect. And if you stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you. Hit like if the story meant something to you. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. There's another one waiting for you in the description. Trust me. The twist in that one is even harder to see coming. Disclaimer. This story is shared for storytelling and reflection purposes. Names, places, and details may be adapted for privacy and narrative clarity.